Good afternoon from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Stephen Clark from spaceflightnow.com, and you're looking live at Space Launch Complex 40, where SpaceX is counting down to a test firing this evening of a Falcon 9 rocket. You can see some of the vapors have appeared around the first stage of the Falcon 9, indicating that propellant loading is underway. Right now, propellant loading appears to be on track for ignition time for this test firing around 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, or 21:30 UTC. This is in preparation for a launch scheduled for tomorrow night with 54 Starlink Internet satellites. Those satellites are already stowed inside the payload compartment, inside the fairing, on top of the Falcon 9 rocket. So again, this is a test firing of the 9 Merlin engines on the bottom of the first stage. Those engines will ignite for about 7 seconds while hold-down restraints keep the Falcon 9 on the ground. This test firing from Pad 40, out on Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, is occurring less than 4 hours before the scheduled launch of a different Falcon 9 rocket from Pad 39A a few miles to the north. That Falcon 9 is scheduled to launch around 9:10 p.m. Eastern Time, 1:10 a.m. UTC, with its own batch of Starlink satellites, as well as a rideshare payload for AST Space Mobile for their space-to-cell-phone broadband network. You're looking now live at Pad 39A, where the Falcon 9 is being prepared for launch tonight at 9:10 p.m. Eastern Time. So a busy evening on tap here on Florida's Space Coast, with a Falcon 9 test firing coming up at 5:30 p.m. in preparation for a launch tomorrow night, and then another Falcon 9 being prepared for launch tonight from nearby Pad 39A. Right now, propellants are being loaded into the Falcon 9 on Pad 40. This is kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants that are being loaded into the Falcon 9 at this time. And we expect to see the so-called big vent from the strongback at about the T-minus 20-minute point. And if the static fire is on track for 5:30 p.m. Eastern, as we believe it is, we expect to see that in about 3 minutes or so. And we're seeing the now big vent from the strongback out at pad 40. This countdown for today's test firing or static fire test is occurring amid incoming inclement weather here on Florida's Space Coast. There is a thunderstorm line approaching from the southwest right now, and there's currently a phase 2 lightning warning in effect for all locations around the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station area. But this does not appear to be a constraint for this static fire test that SpaceX is preparing for at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 21:30 UTC. We're hearing some thunder also here at the Kennedy Space Center at our location about 4 miles from the pad. And you can see some of that vegetation blowing in the wind as a gust front is approaching the area from this nearby thunderstorm activity. Now 19 minutes and 17 seconds until the expected test firing of the Falcon 9 rocket. We're now seeing some rainfall here at the Kennedy Space Center as this thunderstorm is inbound. So far, this storm activity, while it would definitely not be acceptable for a launch at this time, we don't think this is a constraint yet for this test firing. The Falcon 9 will remain on the ground out at pad 40 during the 7-second ignition of the Merlin 1D engines. If you've been following SpaceX's launch activity in recent months, you'll note that static fires, while they used to be a common occurrence before every Falcon 9 launch, have become less frequent. And that is due to SpaceX's increased confidence in their Falcon 9 launch on time ability. They've demonstrated a regular cadence of launches and a reliable cadence of launches as well. And these test firings used to be part of every Falcon 9 launch campaign to ensure that there were no technical issues that could prevent an on-time launch that would be uncovered in a countdown on a real launch attempt. And we believe these test firings are only conducted now when there have been major changes to the Falcon 9 rocket in between missions. So this booster has flown before, and one of the things that can necessitate a static fire test on its next mission is if SpaceX changes out 3 or more of the Merlin engines on the first stage. So that may be the case here, although we're not sure if that is the exact reason SpaceX is performing this test firing before the launch scheduled for tomorrow night. The Falcon 9 out on pad 39A, set for launch later this evening, weather permitting, is not going through a static fire test before its mission. You can see as this thunderstorm is now over the Kennedy Space Center, you can see some of those rain bands passing between our camera location and the Falcon 9 rocket out on pad 40 rather, preparing for this test firing at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, these weather constraints for a launch, this weather that we're experiencing now would definitely not be acceptable for a launch, with lightning and winds, gusty winds in the area. But we believe that the static fire can go forward. However, in my experience covering SpaceX test firings, this is likely the worst weather that we've seen a test firing occur in, with this thunderstorm now right over the spaceport. Again, I mentioned this heavy thunderstorm now right over the Kennedy Space Center, and it appears to have blown our camera over. Looking at pad 40 right now, this is a very strong thunderstorm currently over the Kennedy Space Center, so we hope this weather will pass before the static fire time so we can get out and reset that camera. But there is lightning and very gusty winds currently at the Kennedy Space Center. As I mentioned, this is easily the worst weather that we've seen for a SpaceX static fire test. As you can see, this is a view of the weather radar here on Florida Space Coast. This thunderstorm has approached from the southwest and is currently moving right over the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station with very gusty winds here at the Kennedy Space Center, a lot of lightning and heavy rain. So we don't obviously have eyes right now on the launch pad as SpaceX prepares for this test firing, so we aren't 100% sure if they're proceeding with the test firing at this time at 5:30 p.m. However, we'll be lost visibility of the pad, first due to poor visibility from this rainstorm, and then the wind gust did knock over our camera. We hope to get out before the ignition time to reset that if the weather allows. But you can see this thunderstorm is moving from the southwest to the northeast. It is currently right over the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station area. Less than 10 minutes until the expected time of the static fire test for this Falcon 9 rocket on pad 40, which is scheduled to launch, assuming the test firing goes well tonight, at 10:53 p.m. tomorrow night Eastern Time with 54 Starlink internet satellites. And we just got an update that there is a high wind warning, strong wind warning in effect currently for the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, with winds projected to be occurring between 35 and 50 knots. And we've seen evidence of that right now locally at our location at the Kennedy Space Center. Now about 8 minutes and 15 seconds until the time of the static fire test, if it remains on track for 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Visibility here at the Kennedy Space Center is still poor. We currently can't see any of the launch pads from our vantage point at the Kennedy Space Center due to this heavy rainfall. Now approaching T-minus 3 minutes until the expected time of ignition. We're still waiting for the visibility to improve here at the Kennedy Space Center. Still hearing quite a bit of thunder from this thunderstorm as it's moving over the spaceport. See this weather channel that we're streaming now showing this thunderstorm cell currently getting the attention of the weather team here at the spaceport as it's moving to the northeast. Now 2 minutes to go. We are still waiting for improved visibility, so we're not sure we're going to be able to bring this to you if it's going to happen. We can't even see the pad at this time. The latest we heard was the static fire test was set for 5:30 p.m. Eastern, 21:30 UTC. Now about 30 seconds remaining until the expected time of the static fire test. Again, we're not seeing the launch pad right now due to this thunderstorm. So we unfortunately are not going to be able to bring you any live views of the static fire test due to restricted visibility here at Cape Canaveral. We've passed the time of the static fire test. There was no visibility at 5:30 p.m., so we aren't able to confirm yet if the test firing actually occurred. We were able to recover our camera that was blown over in the wind, but as you can see, it's still raining quite heavily here at the Kennedy Space Center with some gusty winds, a lot of lightning, and Pad 40 is off in the distance in that direction, but as you can see in this view, we can't see it, so even if our camera had been up and running at 5:30 p.m., we wouldn't have seen anything. And sometimes we can hear a rumble from the static fire tests. However, with the near constant lightning here, we wouldn't have been able to discern that when the static fire occurred, if it did occur at 5:30. We're now starting to see the Falcon 9 rocket and Pad 40 again off in the distance with those flashing lights on the 4 lightning towers on each side of the launch pad now visible. Still quite poor visibility here on the Space Coast of Florida, but the rainfall has lightened up somewhat between us and Pad 40. You can see the Falcon 9 still out there on the launch pad. We have not yet been able to confirm if the static fire test occurred at 5:30, if they were able to go ahead with that test firing amid this thunderstorm. So we're going to stand by for any confirmation we can get of that. Continuing to watch live views of Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where we expected and hoped to see the test firing of a Falcon 9 rocket at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time about 26 minutes ago. However, the weather conditions here had other ideas. We had a strong thunderstorm move over the area that limited our visibility. It completely obstructed our view of Pad 40 and all the other launch pads here at Cape Canaveral and at the Kennedy Space Center. So we were not able to see the launch pad at the time of the expected static fire tests. So we still haven't been able to confirm whether the test firing occurred or whether some issue, potentially the storm, may have prevented that test firing from occurring at 5:30 p.m. Again, this test firing tonight is in preparation for a Falcon 9 launch scheduled for tomorrow night, Sunday night, at 10:53 p.m. Eastern, with 54 more Starlink internet satellites. In the meantime, we're going to transition our coverage a bit later this evening for the launch of a different Falcon 9 rocket, which is on standing on Pad 39A right now. Launch tonight is scheduled for 9:10 p.m. Eastern Time, 1:10 UTC from Pad 39A. These are two different missions, two different Falcon 9 rockets scheduled to launch on back-to-back evenings here on Florida's Space Coast. Here's a view live of Pad 39A, where the launch is now a little more than 3 hours away, weather permitting. It has been a stormy evening here. The weather forecast going into today called for a 60% chance of favorable conditions for launch at 9:10 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll see how those conditions evolve over the next few hours. This mission launching later tonight is carrying 34 Starlink internet satellites as well as a rideshare payload for a company called AST Space Mobile. This is a space to cell phone broadband satellite for connectivity directly from satellite to cell phone, riding up to space with 34 more Starlink internet satellites for SpaceX's broadband network. So a rideshare mission on tap later tonight if the weather allows. Liftoff at 9:10 p.m. Eastern from Pad 39A. We'll have coverage of this launch beginning later this evening around 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll go live. And again, the launch is at 9:10 p.m. Eastern, 1:10 a.m. UTC. We hope to have an update during that broadcast of the status of the launch from Pad 40 and that static fire test, which we believe may have occurred at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, but we haven't been able to confirm that yet. We hope to gain confirmation of that in the coming hours and bring that to you on our social media channels, as well as during our broadcast later tonight for this different Falcon 9 launch from Pad 39A. So until later this evening, I'm Stephen Clark from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We'll see you soon.